Hello, everyone. Holly here. I am one of the conscious agents with Reality Sandwich. And today I am so excited to be chatting with Natalie because we are going to be talking about one of my favorite topics to discuss every day, which is past lives and past life regression work. Welcome, Natalie. Thank you so much for being here. Could you take a minute to just introduce yourself? Tell us a little about you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here as well. Hi, I'm Natalie Leroy. I'm an AI design and researcher in London, and I also used to be a sculptor as well.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, I want to know how you first became aware of past life regression work or when this entered your awareness that, hey, maybe I've been here before.
Ah, um, I guess like that journey started when I was really little. I had a distinctive day where I couldn't stop crying when I was about 3 years old, and it's because my mom said to me, I asked her, when do you think I'm going to die? And she said, oh, I think you're going to have 70 more years, maybe 80 more years. And I lost it on her for about a whole day. And I didn't know why. And I was like, oh, that's so long. That's so long. And my little brother kept comforting me. But I just always had this sense of like a lifetime, like I've been here before, right? And I didn't really know why or how that happened. But as a kid, I was exposed to past life regressions through a total fluke. I was a voracious reader, and my dad picked up the return stack at the library instead of picking up books for his 6-year-old kid. And in that stack of books were a whole bunch of different books about experiments at Stanford in the 1960s on past lives, LSD, and basically research into the Indian concept around past lives. And so I read those, and that kind of kicked off my investigation as a kid.
That's some intense reading for a 6-year-old. Yeah, most
Yeah,
people
my
are
mom
reading
wasn't too
like the
happy.
Boxcar Children and stuff like that. You're like flipping through these studies.
I mean,
That,
I was surprised that they did that. I'd never heard about that before, and they had pictures and different. Remember, it was Egyptian artifacts that they asked various people to recall the life that they had, and then pick out the artifacts that were connected to their reign as various Egyptian rulers, and they could correctly do it and name off the hieroglyphs that were involved. And
very
mhm,
cool.
yeah.
And maybe we hear a lot too, like talking about past lives about how little kids, typically really little, are so much more like tuned in, and
Hmm.
often little, toddlers sometimes will just say things. Well, the last time you were my mommy, or little things like that.
Yes.
Grandma told me blah blah blah. So it's kind of perfect, really, that your young spongy mind was like staying engaged with these
Hmm.
somewhat fantastical ideas, and really probably just set you out on this path that you've explored today.
Yeah.
So post that, let's fast forward into your adult life. Is this something that you continue to just sort of stay interested in and read about, or were you like actively like, okay, I want to figure out where I've been, how my past lives have shaped who I am today? Like, what was the next evolution for you?
Mm-hmm. I can't say that I was super interested in it until my early 20s, and I had a really traumatic experience where I was robbed and maimed, and I went into a lot of different types of therapy in order to work through that, a lot of traditional Western medicine. And when talk therapy failed and medication and things like that, I started looking into alternative therapies. And I had my arm was shattered during that incident, and I had broken it actually twice before, and earlier in my life. So someone recommended that might have been a pattern, and that I should look into if that was part of my karma. And I started to explore other kinds of therapy in order to get out of the PTSD loop that I was in. And so I tried all sorts of different things and came across past life regressions and hypnosis. And so my first experience was kind of poor, if I'm being honest with you. I had not been meditating that heavily, and I went into a session and I thought, okay, I'm pretty good at focusing. I'll ace this. Well, past lives regressions are not really something that you can ace, right? So I basically got down into a trance, and all I could see were different kinds of light and myself as a glowing color, which I now recognize as my aura. And the guide was trying so hard to get me to walk through walk through universe, see the door, and come out into my next life, and I just couldn't do it. Right, I didn't trust myself enough. So he gave me a couple of books I'm reading, which was Life Before Life, and then also looking into the research studies that were done in India. So there's about 212 cases of various kids that they tracked through their different lives, and he said, read this, read a little bit of Dolores Cannon. I'll see you in a few months and come back and I'll give you half price and we'll try again. And so that actually helped a lot. Like reading Dolores Cannon gave me a broader sense of what was possible and what I should recognize as a past life, and not trying so hard to slip into something that felt like a movie or like a waking life memory, but thinking about it more in terms of like gently integrating and gently revisiting that, and not really not judging what came up, right? And so my second attempt was a lot more successful, and I woke up in on the hills, walked through a door, saw a door of light after being put into a trance, and woke up on a hill in India where I was tending my goats, right? And I just want to preface this. I've never fantasized about being a goat herder in India. I've never roleplayed as that or anything like that. But I woke up and my nails were all chipped because I had been digging roots out of the ground, and I was singing to my goats as I walked in the hills. And I was a nomadic hermit, right? And I decided to live out there in order to pray and worship as I saw fit, which was quite different from the village that I'd left. And I was surprised at how clear these things were, right? Like a memory from a past life doesn't really feel like a waking moment. It feels exactly like when, if you recall going to the grocery store last week, right? You can remember going into the grocery store, and maybe you can remember what you bought, and you know that you were in a certain atmosphere, maybe even what you wore. But not everything is so clear, right? You're very aware of what you're doing, but you're not really aware of what other shoppers are doing, and you're not really tuned into every single thing like a photograph or anything like that. But so you care about what you're doing. There's emotions attached to what you're doing, but your memories are just like they are here, where they're little like patches of memories or vignettes. It's not a full stream, I think, is what some people expect, and it's not really that.
Can you explain a little bit about the process of being hypnotized or going under, like for someone that
Mm,
maybe is interested in like what should I expect when I show up for something like this? Like how does the process begin?
yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. I guess when you begin, you're what you're signing up for is to go under into a trance for about 2 or 3 hours is usually the length of a session. And a trance feels like that state when you're between sleeping and between being awake. Sometimes you can achieve that with meditation. I know I like to do it after yoga actually and do a little bit of like lucid dreaming. But you're more awake than lucid dreaming, and also your responses can feel automatic, right? So in lucid dreaming, you might feel like you don't really have control over your imagination. And in here, you're not really looking for an imagination. You're actually looking for just reporting on things. And so the hypnotherapist will usually walk you through a guided session verbally where they might guide you to slow down, begin to rest, put parts of your body into a deep sleep. And you'll feel quite heavy actually. It feels almost like you're underwater looking up at the bottom from the bottom of a pool, if that makes
Mm.
sense. You know that feeling when you get when you're all the way at the bottom and there's weight of the water on you, but you can still see what's going on. It feels a lot like that. And so you'll walk all the way down, and then they'll begin to guide you through a series of suggestions. There's lots of different techniques for hypnosis as well, depending on who trained the hypnotist. But
Mhm.
often what they're looking for is the most relevant past life to you. right? So often people have multiple past lives. Some people only have one, some people have none. And so what they're looking for is the one that's going to be the most meaningful for that 3 hour session. Because if there's lots and lots and lots of lives, you could never, you could do that forever. So yeah,
Yeah.
so they're trying to find the thing that's probably the best for you right now to experience and understand.
Okay. So for you, what was the first experience you had that was that? Like the meaningful life that you explored? Was it when you were visiting the goats? Or was there another past life that was maybe, you know, more influential on this carnation?
Yes, I would say that there's one that that definitely changed my life, and I got it completely on a whim. I decided to go to a hypnotherapist. Just had this sense that I needed to go, and often before I make a big life decision, I'll do a past life regression because I found it so useful in understanding patterns and looking into myself a bit more. And so I was considering moving to Portland to go work at Nike, or I had a job offer in London where I would be working on a startup as a lead. And I couldn't really choose. I didn't really know what was going to happen. So I was in Portland. I met with one of the developers I was working with for maybe 20 minutes, and then went to my past life regression. And I was a little late, so the lady was kind of annoyed with me. So I just had to like put myself down on a trance on the couch without without trying too hard. It was definitely weird. But I recorded it, and I woke up in Italy in the 1700s after doing the same exercise. Walk through a door, walk out of a door, and I was a young boy. And uh, One of my friends was my mother, and my father was someone who became my boss later on in life at the startup in England, actually. And I lived out the whole life as a monk and regretting isolating myself for the purpose of religion. And my my mother was my friend, but she was also my employee at the time. And I had pushed her really hard to start her own business herself and to get free of working for other people. And it was one of those things that came up in that life as well, setting her free and setting myself free from the burden of needing someone to police me for spiritual purposes, right? And I thought I would get out of it, and instead of coming out of the trance, I just went into another life. And that's kind of I think that's kind of unusual. And so when I died in that lifetime, I actually woke up about 100 years later in Croatia, and I was married then to my boss at the startup, who was my husband, and the developer that I just met 20 minutes earlier, about 30 minutes earlier, was my son. And we were Croatian peasants and dancing around a fire and had these really beautiful costumes on and had we were doing a mix of different like pagan rituals and Christian rituals. And throughout that lifetime, we were happy as this little family unit on a farm until there was a war that rolled through and the skies turned black and I saw a volcano. And no idea where that came from. My son ended up leaving because we were all starving, and I watched him walk off into the distance. And my husband refused to let me leave the farm. He was so worried that someone would steal from him that he told me he would rather starve to death than leave our farm. And so we did. And he wouldn't let me leave because I was a woman, and we ended up dying there. I came out of that trance, and I knew I had big karma to resolve with these two individuals. And so actually the developer and I ended up moving to England together and building a startup, which we then left and got got my boss, my husband, my former father actually removed from it to set everyone free from that startup. And yeah, no, it was
That's
definitely
wild.
closing a loop. Yeah, but the funny thing is, I looked up Croatia war and volcano just as search terms online, and what came up was a paper about how during the Napoleonic Wars in 1808, there was a volcano that went off in Iceland and caused the skies to turn totally dark and starved a whole bunch of people on
Oh my God.
in that area.
That's
I
crazy.
know. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
It's so
so it can be like a far-reaching effect, right? But would have never drawn that conclusion. I mean, it would have been a lot easier to just stay in the US and take a job in Portland.
right.
But yeah.
But no, your soul had greater plans. Got to work on, your future. All some karma.
Hmm,
So,
hmm.
did you tell these people
Oh
about
yeah.
this? You did? Okay.
Yeah, I did. I
How
did.
was
I
that?
actually, yeah. Um, it depends on who it is,
Hmm.
right? The first past life I had was with my mother. It was my mother in this life as well. And as soon as I knew, I called her up and told her. I don't think she believes me, but that's okay.
Yep.
She recognized a lot of the spiritual things that I had come up, and with those two guys, I would tell them about it over a couple of pints, and my former boss high fived me. Yeah.
Nice. Like, yeah.
Yeah, despite all the rips and stuff, we had a really natural relationship, the three of us, of course, and still, still got along and still did a lot of those things. But I think on some level, when those folks come up, it's like they know, right? They've known you before
Hmm.
and they recognize you too. And even if they don't believe what you're talking about, it's pretty easy to go find a fair amount of research that does corroborate the presence of past lives.
Right. At least allow you to imagine or entertain the idea
Hmm.
whether or not you're willing to like move across the world for it. You at least
Yeah.
entertain the idea, I think. Yeah, that's been my experience too. People are at least like, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
You mentioned having injured your arm multiple times in the same spot. And
Yes.
I've heard some theories about this before, obviously that perhaps it happened in past lives. Did that come up for you? Did you learn anything about why this
Ah,
maybe happened?
yes. So, in that first life, I ended up falling off a cliff and dying. And
Okay.
so I shattered my arm in that lifetime and watched myself die. It wasn't painful. So when you do die in a life, a hypnotherapist typically will tell you you can't feel anything and that you're experiencing no pain, no fear anymore. So the experience is a bit different than actually dying, but it is something more gentle where you start to recognize your soul leaving and that your body is really just a body for that time period, right? And
Hmm.
so I'd broken my arm and fell up a cliff, and I have a bunch of themes about not being alone in different lifetimes. So I died because I was alone. Nobody was there to help me, and I broke my arm. And then in this lifetime, I've done it again. And I think what it is it's a reminder that I'm supposed to be around people and be with people. And right around the time that I broke it, I had been considering moving off to live off grid in the desert in New Mexico. And because that's what I did after my degree. So I was considering doing that again. And I think it was a great wake up that my purpose is to be amongst people, right? And so sometimes I think injuries are reminders to shake up that karma. Sometimes it changes the trajectory of your life, right? And that an interference or can be it can be really useful. And it completely changed my outlook on how I saw myself in therapy. And I don't know if I would have gone on this journey if I hadn't done that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, it sounds like you've made some radical life changes based on this information. After you moved to London, did you seek out someone that does past life regression work there? Did you begin self practice or deeper study? Like, what happened after your move?
Ah, um, I have done a lot more. I have done a lot of deeper study. Doing past life, doing regressions kicked off a whole spiritual journey for me. And at one point, I had considered becoming a monk in Korea, and I had been studying at an ashram and things like that, and eventually walked away from it. But a lot of my psychic abilities started to blossom, and uh, I did a lot of work around looking at records, looking at um, energy and auras in places, and past lives became even more lucid at that point. Right, I'm able to see more, and so I did another one with someone else in the UK who was terrific, and I'd been trying to decide whether to marry my ex or not, or what was the pattern that was going on there. And I woke up in a lifetime as a Roman soldier, and where I had a lot of the people that I went to school with were my kids in my neighborhood. One of my friends was my sister, and uh, I I was a soldier that came to England during to do some conquering, good old conquering, and and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. So we were in a field with my battalion, and I remember looking at my sword and thinking about how we were supposed to kill all these villagers and how they were relatively defenseless and that this wasn't really fair. And I remember thinking this is bullshit, throwing my weapon and walking off. and and I met my partner at that time, and he was a native Brit, and we had a very similar relationship then as we did in this lifetime as well, where we wanted very different things despite loving each other very much, and it caused a lot of issues, right? And so eventually we got tired of each other, and he died, and he was my wife. Sorry, that's confusing. Often you switch genders and things in different
Yeah,
lifetimes.
yeah.
Usually I'm a man, from what I found
Yeah.
out in most of my lifetimes. About 80% of the time, I'm a man. And so you can be different things, but if you have a significant relationship with someone, chances are you've probably met before, and so they might have been your brother, sister, wife, neighbor, child, whatever. But in he and I had switched places before, and so that loop showed me a lot of things about what we were experiencing then, and it helped me end a relationship I cared about deeply that I'd been in for a decade. And I just saw, we didn't learn. We were doing the exact same thing, and we were probably going to continue to do it forever. But other than that, a lot of the people that I was in the field with as a soldier, I ended up working with here in London. Or yeah, and same thing, like instinct, like knew each other. I think one of the other indicators for me is that we will talk about really deep spiritual, life changing topics almost immediately. Maybe from the first meeting. We don't do meet and greet niceties or anything like that. It's really about the spiritual root of things. And usually we have a huge impact on each other in this lifetime as well. And so, yeah, I ended up working in the London finance market with a lot of my leaders, my fellow soldiers, and stuff like that. Um,
Whole different line of work.
I did not tell them. I have to admit, I did not tell them. Yeah.
Wow. Well, if there'd ever been like a Halloween party, you could have just shown up in full garb if it triggered anything, like,
Yeah,
feel
yeah.
like sparring anyone? No?
Remember me, guys?
Yeah, remember.
Yeah.
So what did you learn? Like, what ended up happening with your partner then in this life, or how did that past life
Ah,
regression inform your
yes.
decision about do we or don't we?
Ah, yeah. There are a couple of serendipitous things that led up to this. So, we met in art school, and I guess what Holly's referencing is that I recently got engaged, and before I got engaged, I decided to do regression just because that's my MO, apparently. But I guess I've known my current partner for about 15 years, and we were good friends we ever before we ever even started dating. And I did a regression that was very different than any other one I've ever done, and I did it with someone who's trained a bit differently. Her name is Arena Nola, and she does regressions for couples and multiple people to look at their lifetimes. And what she does is that usually most regressionists have you go through one lifetime at a time, and it's kind of a surprise if you wake up in another one. And what Arena does is she does sort of like the data gathering of all different lives. So she will put you in a trance, give you a deep healing, and then go over the spectrum of different lives that you have, right? To see what sort of connections that you have with the partner that you're asking about. So she asked me about um, how many lives I've had, how many lives I've had as a man, as a woman, how many lives I've had with my partner, how many lives we've had that were romantically connected, where we were happy together, and to whittle that down, right, and see um, what sort of things that we can learn from that. I had experienced kind of like a typical passive regression where again, walked across what feels like an empty void, opened a door, and I was outside of in pre-colonial Mexico, right? And you recognizable by where we were, the roads, and it was just like peasant farmers. And my partner was my little sister, who was abducted at one point by people that were going to enslave him, and I never saw him again. And so in this lifetime, what we're trying to do is stay together and not get abducted. But there were many lifetimes that we had as sisters in northern Canada, as brothers who were sailors in Greece somewhere, as father and daughter. I've been his husband, he's been my wife many times. As I said, I'm usually a man. And and it was funny reviewing all of those things with him present and just looking into all different colors of eyes and knowing it's the same person, right? Knowing that we've been together many times. That lifetime, that regression in particular, was super interesting because she also pushed me to explore the oldest lives that we had together, where we weren't actually people at all. We were part of the same soul. Looking at whether we were plants, whether we were animals together, whether we had lives together as non-humans, right? Which I've never had someone that's pushed for that and been so articulate about it. It was really fantastic, and I think what was interesting for me to see and hard for me to describe on the recording were the off-world lives and the lives where we were maybe just an energy body or a particular type of being. And that's something that I do want to explore further on, is lifetimes as different things. You know, everybody's human, but we've also worked through so many different kinds of incarnations, right? And to explore that and figure out a way to speak about it, I think it's really important for people to consider too, is that you are connected to those entities, those beings, those trees, that like any sort of mineral, right? You are that as well.
Yeah, that's where it can get a little weird and super interesting, I think, because especially when Dolores Cannon is great about talking on those topics and helping to really bring that down to helping to understand like that timeline or evolution or potential. I think she was probably the first person that kind of introduced me to that as well. Like the concept of other planets, places, planes of existence, and things that we would maybe consider a little sci-fi in our real world, but um, have really helped me so much expand my understanding of what exists and what's possible. Um,
Yeah.
are there are there other maybe intellectuals or academics that explore those topics as well that you've been interested in, like personal reading or research that you've been
Mm.
drawn to?
Um, okay, so I have to say big kudos to Dolores Cannon and all of it.
Mhm.
Really, she has done a really great job of introducing those things in a gentle way. I would say if you are interested in that I think she's the best one to bring up. Um, I guess from other perspectives, there's a really old philosopher that I read last year, Emanuel Swedenborg. He's a Swedish philosopher and mystic that goes into what it's like to exist in different planes of existence and very carefully details out how lives work, right? And I found his work a few years ago, and it's very clear in some ways what those how one can exist in multiple places at once, right?
Mm.
Or how one might be able to share different things. I think uh, the other book too would be Life Before Life. Is a terrific one for someone that would like maybe more facts and case studies. That's a terrific place to look as well. Um, and I guess I also I guess looking into traditional Hindu and Vedic practices as well around past lives, looking at your Vedic astrology chart if you have any suspicions about certain things, or looking into reading around past lives. I think uh, in cultures where it's accepted that there's a past life, there's just more literature out there and things that are a bit more normalized and less sensationalized, where it doesn't have to be some crazy LSD experiment in Stanford. It can be something that's as simple as I used to be my mom's neighbor, right? And all the sometimes the simplicity of reading through a case study like that, I think really sells it for me. Actually, that it can be something so simple about like just remembering where certain rocks are, or an address, or a lot of the time when people die of something traumatic, they'll wake up with scars or injuries in their next body as well. And really simple things like that, I think are what help me understand that it's normal. As for off-world things, I personally love the podcast Mysterious Universe for
Mm.
a whole variety of different sort of exploration into those things. And it's kind of like they've read every book that you want to read, but you can't afford on Amazon, and they give you a funny synopsis about it.
Nice, nice. I love
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
um, so I'm thinking about like, in the past life regression work I've done, there've definitely been, you're seeing these people come back in different themes and different relationships. And
Hmm.
it has me wondering, like, how far is our reach of soul groups? Like everyone that I've interacted with in this life, do I know them, or is it like there are 30 people in my immediate universe right now that I've interacted with before, and maybe another 20 that this is our first go round. Do you have any thoughts or insight about how maybe those connections work, or running theories?
Okay. I do think that you are going to be in contact with your soul group, right? When you incarnate, it's very rare that you're going to be alone. And if you do feel alone, you probably just haven't found them yet. I definitely, in the last regression that I had, I saw quite vividly how that works, right? How we separate from source. And the biggest group was around 600 to 400 people, right? That you connect with and that you have a certain same sort of resonance with. And then there's a group of about 40, right? And these people are going to be sort of like your soulmates, like the group that really can touch your heart. And then there was an even smaller group of around like four people that might be almost like your immediate family, or people that you really feel quite strongly about, right? That you might have and that was my experience. I assume though I've read other accounts of that as well, where they're doing where that soul group, right? You are going to feel most comfortable being around them. They might be part of your school, part of your neighborhood, that is going to be your friends, right? Or whatever sort of community that you feel accepted in. I think those reaches, though, sometimes they're geographical, but also because of the age that we live in now, the internet, kind of removes that, doesn't it? Where we don't have to be geographically all in the same place anymore in order to experience that. And so I feel like soul groups probably were almost like villages or neighborhoods, maybe 50 or 60 or 100 years ago, and now can be located nearly anywhere, but you will be in contact with them, right? You will be able to find them.
Wow. Have you ever, during your past life regressions, have you ever kind of entered a space where you were between lives? Or have you always just kind of
Yes.
launched into, yes? Okay, what was that experience like?
Yeah. So, the first time that I definitely thought I had a failed regression, that
Mhm.
I think that was, and now I recognize it as like it's kind of the place between, right? So, you are experiencing yourself as a color, right? As a glowing ball. And I took a tour of Earth before I decided to go on Earth. And so I I traveled over a couple of different areas. I was floating. There were other spheres that were joining me, or other colors of orbs that were joining me. And I was also checking out humans and not seeing humans before. And so I went up really close to one, and they actually inhaled me.
Yeah, that's
And
a new
I went through their nose. Yeah.
one.
Um, and so I thought this was a failure because I was like, I'm not really a person. This this is just whatever this is. And I was looking for people though, and I think the people that were with me were people that I was intending to incarnate with, and we were exploring a bit, right?
Okay.
And in my most recent one, we had done something very similar where it was a we were spirits, but we were also figuring out what bodies were like, right? So we did sort of a test run like that. And then we got into human bodies that were much older, more like proto human bodies, and we had a lot of trouble controlling them because we had only ever been these big balls of light before. So,
It's an
yeah,
avatar
the like,
situation, like, okay.
yes, it was very much like that. It was like trying to in my past life in the regression I keep saying like it's like being made into wood. Like, this is so heavy and we can't walk and we look like action figures trying to interact with each other
Oh my
because we're
God,
so bad at it.
amazing. Learning how to human 101.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember reading something once too about how, like, coming back to the topic of souls deciding to be here versus somewhere else where maybe it's easier or whatever. A lot of times we might choose to come be here on this earth to be human because we have both physical and mental limitations. And that might not be the case everywhere else. So there's a lot of growth and learning to be had here. Like, if you do well or whatever, the experience might be like, if you're learning your lessons and moving through life, there's a lot of growth that can be had as human. Whereas other times, maybe we need to go incarnate somewhere else that's a little bit simpler, or we need to rest, perhaps. Is that also congruent with things you've learned?
I guess I have personally experienced that about resting, but I do feel very much like this is a training ground. And sometimes I have dreams about or put myself in a meditation in a school, right? And if we knew all the answers like we do in other places or other dimensions, right? How would we really be learning? In some way, in some ways, it's like you're playing a video game, and if you knew how every scene ended, would you really be testing yourself, right? Would you ever get to try that again? And the point is to try it, right? To really go in and do that hard thing, because you're gonna have to do it again if you don't do it this time. To feel your feelings, allow yourself to change through, your body experiencing things, right? And to truly integrate those things in. I think, I mean, I'm sure you heard this, like the lesson repeats as needed. And I really do feel like when you have the opportunity to try something or when you're being asked to expand, that you're going to do it a couple of different times. Obviously, breaking my arm the first time didn't work, so it had to be done again.
Mm.
But I think that those lessons repeat, and doing regressions is in some ways it feels like a hint, right? A hint at whatever that loop or whatever that lesson is, or to see maybe even if it's not real at all, even if the things that I'm experiencing are completely created by my head, that is an amazing metaphor for something that I'm going through, and presenting it to me in that way has helped me change or break out of situations that I felt like were forever or were making me really unhappy. And that force, that story, that emotion has helped me to change in so many different ways, that I wouldn't really trade it, right? Any of those lessons I wouldn't go back on. And so maybe next time I'll have a rest life and I can be a rock for a while, or a water, or like like a water plant. That sounds great. but, but this one, I'm actually like, I want to do it all, right? I really think that like once you have that feeling of I've chosen this and I want to be here, embracing it is part of learning how to love it, right?
Oh, yeah. That yeah, I mentioned this to you the first time we connected was I think the most empowering thing to me about exploring past lives is just the ownership of what is happening to me right now and understanding that my soul literally chose every triumph and every challenge, every person that I was going to harmonize with or battle against. This was all me. I cannot point any blame. And it just really has helped me embrace who I am, what I'm experiencing, and roll through it a little bit easier, right? Like it's just a little bit easier to take everything in stride and then appreciate it for what it is, knowing there was intention to this.
Yes, yes. And even the smallest of things, seeing them, how they resonated with you in a previous life to how they resonate with you now, and not discounting those things, your feelings, that little conversation that you had with your mother, right? They all become meaningful in that tapestry, right? And that when you're able to acknowledge it, and it can amplify in the next life, for better or for worse. I think absolutely that point, especially after my arm was broken, I really felt, I was attacked on the street, and so if a lot of people are like, oh, it's a senseless, meaning, senseless random crime, and realizing that maybe it wasn't, and maybe this is something that I need, and I could use it as a tool, gave me so much more power over that situation where I should have a lot of the coaching or the therapy that I got afterwards was like, no, no, you're a victim. And yes, I was a victim, but it can also be a tool of empowerment. And really taking that back was life changing. I really wouldn't have it any other way if I had to do it again.
That's super powerful. Um, well, before we go, is there any advice you would offer or words of encouragement you would offer somebody that's interested in exploring past lives or how they can get started or where to look?
Okay. Do some reading. Choose what resonates with you, right? Some stories are going to be more romantic. Some things are going to be more like scientific case studies. Choose what resonates with you and go for it. I would also read a couple of different accounts if you can, and practice meditating. If you do a regression, you might not end up in the area that you always were drawn to, or you might not even find a life that's that interesting. Think about it. Most of the time, most people have very boring lives, right? They really do. You can be a potato farmer in Germany. You can be you can be working at a desk job your entire life, and that's okay too, right? Not everyone is going to be Cleopatra, and most people are not going to be Cleopatra. Only probably one person is Cleopatra, right? So just allowing yourself to realize that there's beauty in the everyday, and that finding things in patterns for yourself, finding meaning in that lifetime as well, and stitching it together. so that you can have an even longer film, of life to watch, is really important. And choose a regressionist that is near you if you can for your first time. Do it online if you're a little bit more experienced, I would say. And keep a journal, record it, listen to it a couple of different times, and don't judge what comes up in your head, because I think people want a clean, clear film like ending, and sometimes what you're seeing is unbelievable to you, and it's going to be memorable and meaningful only to you. But enjoy. Yeah, I absolutely enjoy it. Go see what you were before.
Love it. Well, thank you so
Mhm.
much. This was excellent. Really appreciate you meeting with me today.
Oh, absolutely. My delight. Really. Thank you, Holly.